Acharei Mot Kedoshim, after the death and the holy ones. This double portion comes to us from Leviticus chapter 16, verse 1 through 20, verse 27. Now, at the beginning of the second portion in this week's double portion, we have several rules about holiness. Sometimes it's referred to as the Holiness Code. And some of these rules, when we look at them from a practical or worldly perspective, they don't make a lot of sense. But one of the things that we have to develop in our walk with the Lord is faith that His commandments are for our benefit. And that even if we don't understand why He's giving those commands, we still need to obey. And we still need to trust that there is benefit to obeying these commandments. Even if we don't 100% understand the reasoning for these commandments, we can still learn things from them. They can teach us principles. You see, every commandment you learn falls under sort of an umbrella of an overarching principle. And when we live by those principles, it helps us to understand the importance of the commandments, and it helps us to live a life that honors the Lord more thoroughly. So I thought this week we could just go through and look at some of these commands regarding holiness. We're going to start with Leviticus chapter 19, verses 9 through 10. When you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap your field right up to its edge. Neither shall you gather the gleanings after you harvest, and you shall not strip your vineyard bare. Neither shall you gather fallen grapes of your vineyard. You shall leave them for the poor and the sojourner. I am the Lord your God. This is sort of a primitive form of almost welfare in the land of Israel. You would leave the edges of your fields, and you would leave whatever you dropped or whatever stalks fell over and weren't necessarily picked up during the harvest. You would leave those behind, and then the poor would be able to come through afterwards, after you had harvested what you had, and they would be able to pick what was left over. The idea being that you would leave something for the poor, but they would also have the dignity of being able to earn it themselves. They wouldn't just be given a handout. You wouldn't be saying, well, I know you can't take care of yourself, so here. Rather, they would have the self-respect that comes with being able to, at least to some degree, take care of themselves. This teaches us several things. Number one, it teaches us that caring for the less fortunate is everybody's job. It doesn't say if your field is above a certain size, leave whatever's left. It doesn't say only if you live close to people who are poor. It says everybody. This is a commandment for everybody. The other thing that we see in this commandment is it doesn't specify what the edge of your field is. You could leave one stalk of wheat and say, well, I didn't go all the way to the edge. You could leave just one or two grapes behind and technically be obeying. But the Lord wants us to help others out of a sense of willingness and out of a sense of desire to see that person benefit. And we're going to see this idea of acting in a way that benefits other people voluntarily later in this week's Torah portion. Another thing that we learn from this is the idea of contentedness. Don't be greedy for what you have. Don't say, I have to get every last grain of wheat and I have to get every last grape. Rather, learn what Rav Shaul or Paul taught to Timothy in 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 6, when he said, godliness with contentment is great gain. See, our fields are, in the metaphorical sense, we don't have to try and wring every last bit out of them. We should be happy with what we have, and we should be happy to help our neighbor. The next bit I'd like to look at is Leviticus chapter 9, verses 13 through 14. You shall not oppress your neighbor or rob him. The wages of a hired worker shall not remain with you all night until the morning. You shall not curse the deaf or put a stumbling block before the blind, but you shall fear your God. I am the Lord. Here's another passage that talks about how we should help each other. Now, oftentimes during those days, a hired person would only be able to live from day to day. The money that they earned Monday was the money they needed to live on Tuesday, or sometimes even the money they needed to live on Monday night. And there's no reason to hold that person's money, essentially saying, quickly discharge these debts. Make sure you are square with this person. But it also teaches us that this employment relationship is for the benefit of both people. When you hire somebody, you're not just hiring them so you can get as much out of them for as little money as possible. And conversely, when you work for somebody, you don't work so you can get as much money for as little effort as possible. Now, another interesting thing is cursing the deaf. And it's easy to say, well, who cares if I curse the deaf? They can't hear. They don't know if I curse them. I'm not hurting anybody. I'm not doing any harm. But that's where we need to shift our thinking. And this passage opens the idea of how we should shift this thinking. Because now we're not thinking, what harm does it do? We're thinking, what good does it do? Who does it benefit when I curse somebody who can't hear? Number one, they can't defend themselves. Number two, whatever curse I wanted to get to them with, I'm not going to get to them because they can't hear me. In Ephesians 4:29, it kind of helps us understand more fully this idea of asking what good does it do rather than what harm does it do. It says, let no corrupting talk come out of your mouth, but only such as is good for building up, as fits the occasion, that it may give grace to those who hear. The question isn't what harm does it do. The question is what good does it do. The question isn't what harm do my words do, because when you curse somebody who can't hear, technically you're not doing any harm. You're not hurting their feelings because they can't hear you. But what good are you doing? Who are you benefiting? Who are you helping? The next passage I'd like to look at is Leviticus 19, verses 15 through 16. You shall do no injustice in court. You shall not be partial to the poor or defer to the great. But in righteousness you shall judge your neighbor. You shall not go around as a slanderer among your people, and you shall not stand up against the life of your neighbor. I am the Lord. The idea of this command, it teaches us the importance of justice, treating people how they deserve, but more than that, treating people based on their actions, not who they are. Not looking at someone and saying, well, he's rich, it doesn't matter if he doesn't get a fair deal in court. Or saying he's poor, it doesn't matter if he gets a fair deal. Or saying he's rich, maybe if I judge unfairly on his behalf, I can get something in the end. Or saying, well, this guy's had such a hard life, I may as well judge unfairly on his behalf. Both of those are wrong, because when we're called to make a decision between right and wrong, that should be the only thing that matters. We should only care about what is right and what is wrong, not who is a good person or who is a bad person, or not who has already had enough good things in their life or who has not had enough good things in their life. Those aren't for us to decide. When we're presented with right and wrong, we simply choose right. So, what are some other commandments from this week's Torah portions that, while maybe not making a whole lot of sense from a worldly perspective, can teach us some principles that help us to live a more holy life? Let me know in the comments, and if we gave you a laugh, give us a like, and if you learned something, give us a share. I'm the Messianic Torah Dude. Shalom, and stay in the Word.